Experience the future of packaging and processing up close and in action. Explore groundbreaking innovations, engage with hands-on solutions, and connect with the experts transforming the industry. See how these advancements can revolutionize your products, production lines, and business. It all starts here. Don't miss out. Register today at packexpolasvegas.com/unpackedpod. You're listening to Unpacked with PMMI, where we share the latest packaging and processing industry insights, research, and innovations to help you advance your business. Hi, and welcome to another edition of Unpacked with PMMI. I'm your host, Sean Riley, and today we are getting a little technical, but it's worth it because safety first. We have our own in-house safety expert, Bruce Main, to tell us all about risk assessment. Welcome to the podcast, Bruce.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Just for the handful of people that don't know who you are, why don't you give us a little bit about who Bruce Main is and exactly how you're involved with PMMI?
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. I am Bruce Main. I am the technical advisor to PMMI. I've been involved with PMMI for about 20 years now. I'm an engineer, professional engineer, and certified safety professional, and I do quite a bit of work in risk assessment and machinery safety.
So we hear risk assessment a lot, and I'm probably going to stumble over that a lot. But anyway, we hear risk assessment a lot. What exactly is it in layman's terms?
It's basically a safety assessment. It's a type of analysis where you look to identify hazards associated with machinery or equipment. And then it's a process that it guides you through a process to develop risk reduction measures to make sure that you achieve acceptable risk.
Okay, then where did it come from? When did this become a topic for machinery in particular? And I guess when did PMMI first integrate risk assessment into our B155.1 standard?
Well, let's start with the last part first. The B155.1 first integrated risk assessment in the 2000 edition of that standard. And the reason that it was done then was because of where it came from. The risk assessment process really got legs in 1995, 1996 timeframe when the European Union issued the Machinery Directive. And the Machinery Directive is a law in Europe, and in that law, it requires that machine suppliers or builders do risk assessments. And because of that, and because PMMI members, many of them were shipping machines to the EU, we needed a methodology to do this. And that's where this really came from.
So I'm a supplier or owner of machinery. Who's required to do a risk assessment? Is that something I can do on my own, or is that someone I need to bring someone in to do?
Well, it's intended to be something you can do yourself. As a builder of a machine or a supplier of a machine, the Machinery Directive is intended that you can self-certify. And so who's required to do this under the Machinery Directive, the law in Europe? The machine supplier is required to do it. Now, under B155.1, we operate in a little bit of a different legal environment. And so there's requirements in the B155.1 standard that both the supplier of the machine is required to do a risk assessment, and the user of the machine is also supposed to do a risk assessment. So the machine supplier looks at the machine as they build it in its intended use, and the user of the machine looks at how that machine is used within a facility and the hazards that might be associated with the facility.
Do they bring that to each other to make sure they mesh, or is that something that's done independently?
Usually it's done independently. It depends. It can be independent. Sometimes if it's a turnkey application, that there's quite a bit of collaboration, and that's illustrated in a figure in the B155.1 standard. So if it's an off-the-shelf type of machine, a labeler, then there may be very little collaboration, whereas if a supplier is building you an integrated bottling line, then that quite a bit of collaboration will go on, and that risk assessment may be done collaboratively for both the machine as well as the installation.
Are there, besides one being from the supplier and one being from the purchaser, is there different ways to do a risk assessment?
Yes, there are many different ways to do risk assessments. And that's one of the great things about risk assessment is there's lots of flexibility. The key thing is that you need to identify hazards and reduce risk to an acceptable level. Those are the very fundamental pieces. And there's lots of different ways to do it in different industries. Semiconductor industry has a methodology. The robot industry has a methodology. The machinery methodology is available. The B155.1 follows the machinery methodology as well. So there's a whole bunch of different approaches to risk assessment, and there's flexibility in how you can do it.
Okay, so if I'm a packaging company, does PMMI have one that they suggest, a method that I should follow?
The methodology that's illustrated in the B155.1 standard is the one that we recommend, and we do that because it's easy to use and easy to learn. It provides enough structure and granularity to help you identify hazards without getting down a rat hole and getting lost. So there's when I say there's lots of different ways to do it, there's also lots of different ways to overdo it, if you will. And this is the methodology that's illustrated in the standard. We take one methodology and work through the standard in illustrating what's supposed to be done, what we intend you to do. But there's also an annex on other ways to go about this.
So that's basically our version is simplifying a way to do it so that you're not, like you said, overdoing it.
That's correct. I mean, it needs to be done. This is not child's play. I mean, there's actually you've got to pay attention and work at risk assessment. It's not easy. It's not something you can just pencil whip, but it also should not be and is not something that really requires a specialist to go about doing this.
Okay. So then, since I'm not bringing in a specialist to do it, could you give me some key steps on how I would do a risk assessment process?
Yes, there are 5 key steps. And when we look at the different methodologies and the different approaches to risk assessment across several industries, and I've had the opportunity to do that because I've written a couple books on this topic of risk assessment, what you see is the commonalities is, first step is you need to identify hazards. Second is to assess the risks. Third is reduce the risks to an acceptable level. Fourth is to document your results, and fifth is to follow up to make sure you've done what you said you're going to do. And of those 5 steps, the first one, identify hazards, and the third one, reduce risk to an acceptable level, are the most important parts. Because if you don't identify hazards, you can't achieve acceptable risk. You're going to potentially miss something. And if you don't reduce risk to an acceptable level, you're missing the point. Now, I say these 5 steps are common. What is most interesting is the second step, assessing risk. That is where the wheels come off typically, where engineers are trained to be very precise and like to measure things. And when we try to assess risk, it's fundamentally a subjective evaluation. And there's great efforts made by engineers all over the world trying to get away from the subjectivity of it. And that's one of the challenges of risk assessment, is that fundamentally you want to keep your eye on the goal and identify hazards and reduce risk to an acceptable level. The scoring of risk is really not that important, and it's sometimes overemphasized.
Okay, because that the thought I keep having is, how do I know that I've assessed risk to, like you said, because you would think that it being such a specific industry and engineers being the way they are, that they would have already engineered all of that out. So where is this level, or who is deciding? Is that why it remains subjective? There isn't one, level where it is considered acceptable?
Correct. And it's different for the application. So if we're making cotton balls, we have one level. If you're making steel, it's entirely different level. The hazards are different, the risks are different. And it would be great if somewhere in industry from above we said, okay, you need to get to be a 7. If you get 7, you're good, and if you're more than 7, you're not good. But it really depends on the application. And some industries have taken that approach where they've tried to set a specific level. Other industries, like the packaging industry, if you look at B155.1, the standard talks about acceptable risk. We have a definition in the standard, and the requirement is that you meet acceptable risk. We never tell you what that is because it is application specific. It's going to be dependent upon the company and the culture that's doing the work and building the machine. So what the standard provides is the process that you work through to achieve acceptable risk.
Okay, then how do I get started? How do I integrate risk assessment into my process?
Well, you need to form a team. That's usually the best way to, and get the resources to understand what's going on. B155.1 is certainly a great place to start. There are tools available. The PackSafe software is a tool that we have developed and offer for sale for companies to use. It guides them through the process, lets you know what to do next and how to make decisions about what you need to do. It's not an expert system. It doesn't tell you what to do, but it tells you what to think about. So that's one of those tools that will help you work through this process. The standard is something that is a very good resource, and you can also if you would like some more assistance, you can get training. And the training PMMI offers the risk assessment training. Fred Hayes and I have done the risk assessment training for many years. And this is a 2-day session where we talk about the different topics of risk assessment, products liability aspects, aspects related to control systems, and even OSHA enforcement, and various topics in this 2-day session. And we spend a fair amount of time working with the PackSafe software, getting people to do risk assessments in the training session. So there's a lot of resources available.
It sounds hard. It sounds like it's going to be very hard to do. And you've given a bunch of these. Fortunately, you've given a bunch of tools that can be used, like the PackSafe and the standard. Am I overstating how hard it is, or is it something that is difficult but you still need to do?
Well, you do need to do it, and it's not hard. It takes some time, and typically you can do a risk assessment of a machine anywhere. It might take 4 to 8 hours if you do a task-based approach. If you use a hazard-based approach, it will take a little bit less. So it does take some time, but it's not an infinite amount of time, and it's eminently doable.
That sounded what you just said, not to cut you off, sounded better than I thought it would be, even longer than like a day or a shift like that.
No,
Okay.
I mean, and part of that is just understanding what's the process, what's the expectation, and I mean, the big issue about risk assessment is you have to be able to finish it, and you certainly can make this a 40-hour project if you really want to. We don't encourage that. I've never had anybody ever say, "Can you make this take longer?"
Okay. I think obviously the big picture for all of this is for legal reasons. And so what are the legal implications of doing a risk assessment, whether it's in Europe or the US?
Well, let's start with Europe, because there's a law. The machinery directive is a law that requires that you do risk assessment. So if a member is shipping a machine into Europe, you have to do risk assessment as required by the law. And that's just what you have to do. In the U.S., we have the standard, the B155.1 standard. That's not a law. It's just a consensus standard. So it's a situation where you don't have to do it by law, but the standard is going to be what is used to measure your performance in the court of law if somebody were to get hurt. So you really need to be doing risk assessments, and it's going to be hard to defend a company if they're not doing it, primarily because it's been required now for almost 20 years.
So there are obviously legal implications of not doing a risk assessment.
Certainly. I mean, if you haven't done one, that doesn't mean all is lost. And there's certainly ways to defend cases where there's a risk assessment has not been done, but it's certainly a lot easier to be able to, and one of the ways that we've had success in defending companies in products liability cases is to be able to demonstrate that the company complied with the applicable standards and that had that's one measure of achieving acceptable risk.
How does this apply to, because we have members in Canada and Mexico, let's say for Canada, is there a similar type approach, or is it more for them selling into these two areas?
Well, it certainly applies for them selling into these areas, but Canada has the CSA standards. They don't have a packaging specific standard, but they do have the Z432 standard on safety of machinery. Canada tends to follow the ISO standards. So what would be a parallel standard to the B155.1 standard would be the ISO 12100, 12100. That standard requires risk assessment in it's much the same way as B155.1. And frankly, when we wrote the 2006 edition of B155.1, we started with 12,100 and other standards and built on that. Now in Mexico also tends to follow US and ISO standards. So if you're building this, I mean, the main idea is you want to build one machine and ship it anywhere. And the standards writers, I mean, I help write standards. We get that message loud and clear. You don't want to be able to, you don't want to have standards for Canada and a different set for US and a different set for Europe. So you're making 3 different machines or whatnot. So the standards writers are trying to do that. That's called harmonization. It doesn't mean that the requirements are identical, but they are essentially harmonized so that you shouldn't have to make or build different machines. Now, there are some small differences. The color of wire, for instance, is sometimes different. But generally speaking, the point is you want to try to build one machine and ship it anywhere, and it needs to comply with the standards.
This isn't the most upbeat topic, risk assessment, because you're basically trying to think about something bad happening. Are there other reasons for the for people to do risk assessments, that would help in the design of their machinery that isn't just as a, kind of eliminating hazard type thing?
Sure. I mean, this all sounds gloomy and doomy, doesn't it?
Yeah, a little bit.
One of the interesting things is the number of industry standards that now require risk assessment, and it is quite a large number. And I firmly believe that if this was just about safety, you wouldn't see that. Because the good news is, A, it's a good business process, but B, so you will actually build better machines, and that's because you're going to come to a better understanding of how your customers are using your machines. So, for instance, we have seen situations, and I want to say almost every project that I work on, what comes out of the risk assessment is one of two things. You either have hit a home run and you've identified all the hazards and you've got it solid and you've got a great machine and now the confidence in your design goes up, or we're able to identify small changes that can actually improve the productivity, the throughput, the ease of use, the speeds. You're just making better machines. And one of our customers commented that when engineers' confidence goes up, costs go down.
I like that.
Yeah. And so, I mean, if this was just about safety, I really don't think you'd see this kind of requirement or this kind of traction. But because people actually find ways to build better machines, and let me give you an example. If you need to change a pump or a motor on a machine, and the design of the machine is such that it's buried inside the middle of the machine, in order to get to it, you have to dismantle the machine, that could really impact your downtime. But if you identify that task, and there's safety implications to all this, but if you make it so that you can actually get to the pump or the motor, get in and get out, make that change and do it relatively quickly, that impacts your ability to, your customer's ability to produce.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense even for me. Okay, then let's move on to, I know PMMI just published a new edition of the Product Liability Prevention Guide. Is risk assessment, does that tie in with this guide?
It does, because there are two elements that are important in preventing product liability. And the whole point of preventing product liability is you want to stay out of trouble, right? The way to do that is to build a safe machine and make the company defendable. And building a safe machine is all about complying with the B155.1 standard and using risk assessment to achieve acceptable risk.
Okay. And I guess, could you give me a little more on what you mean by making the company defendable?
Certainly. So companies that ship machines, right before you ship it, do you take a photograph of the machine with the machine guards in place and the warning labels in place? Let's hope you do, because that photograph can be worth gold in defending the company and making it defendable. Because say the machine's out in use for 8 years and it's been sold a couple times, and somebody gets hurt on that machine because a guard is missing, and the plaintiff attorney comes along and says, your machine is defective because it doesn't have a guard. It should have a guard. You pull out the photograph and are able to show when that machine left our facility, it had a guard on it. That's making the company defendable. That's not about building a safe machine.
Right. I understand. That's interesting. Okay. I think that's a great overview of risk assessment. So we're going to stop it there. And anyone that needs more information can go to PMMI.org for the PackSafe source software and the Product Liability Prevention Guide. Thank you for listening to Unpacked with PMMI. Be sure to join us next time for more packaging and processing industry insights. Please rate, review, and subscribe. To do that, go to the iTunes podcast or Spotify app on your phone and search for Unpacked with PMMI.